Hi everybody, I'm Bree the Plant Lady checking in with a weekly garden tour, and today's theme is all about pollinators. As you can see, one of my all-time favorite hydrangea paniculatas, this is one called Green Cascade, is now officially in flower, and it is attracting a huge diversity of pollinators, including the long-awaited monarchs. I can't wait to show you the videos of all of the beautiful butterflies, bees, beetles, and everything else that are visiting the foodscape right now. The north side of the house is not usually the first place I feature unless it is time for this particular hydrangea to bloom. There is so much activity happening here right now. This is why Hydrangea paniculata Green Cascade is my favorite variety. There are so many different pollinators, including the first monarchs that I've seen, and there's multiple monarchs. There's different varieties of swallowtails, bees, moths, all sorts of stuff happening on this bush right now. I just am so pleased that it's happening. Sneak peek at a monarch in there. Big fat bee. You just stand here. It's just a blur of activity. And I have several of these. I have 3 of this variety, and each one is completely covered up with pollinators. In addition to the hydrangeas blooming, the phlox are doing great. A whole bunch of crinums have recently opened. I don't know the name of this, but I'm gonna ask my friend Jenks Farmer. Of course, these echinaceas have been powerhouses all summer long. This corner up here with the phlox paniculata bright eyes is really starting to get filled with activity. Butterflies, bees, moths, you name it. They've been hanging out here. What I really love are the little hummingbird moths. And they happen to love our native flowering garden phlox. August 1st is such a special time in Zone 7, Central North Carolina, when all of these beautiful native pollinators come out and show themselves off for the world. Well, there have been tons of swallowtails already for several weeks, but really the population is just starting to explode. What I'm most excited about is finally seeing monarchs. And I see one here. Again, this hydrangea is favored by all the pollinators. If you look here, you can see there's, bees. So much butterfly activity. Oh my gosh. This is like what my dreams are made of. Last night, I got a good portion of the wave hand weeded. I still have a little more to do today, but I think with the barley being removed, it looks significantly better. And I think actually the pumpkins did germinate. I think these are the Seminole Pumpkin. I just thought that I had planted them more in the middle of the bed and not on the edge. But I'm feeling pretty good that this is actually going to end up being a pumpkin ground cover. And the sweet potatoes, which I featured yesterday in a video, are definitely taking hold. If I can keep the rabbits from eating them, this will be a really beautiful ground cover combination with sweet potatoes and Seminole pumpkins. Now, because there's so much open space, I did go ahead and I added a bunch of zinnia seeds, and I've been contemplating whether I should just toss some buckwheat in just to make sure that I get the ground plane coverage that I'm looking for. As you can see, the eucomas, even in the shade, are flowering quite well. I'm really excited. I think this border looks good. It's gonna greet visitors less than a week from the tomato tasting, y'all. Tomato tasting is Saturday, August 7th. And I hope the people who have purchased tickets will enjoy the time they spend here. I'm really happy to say that I can see a difference in the growth and development of this front border in the 1 week that has passed since I weeded and fertilized. Now, we have not had a drop of rain in that time, but I have been watering pretty regularly. And I think if I look back in last week's tour, I think I'll be able to see a dramatic difference just in 1 week. It's also been really hot, and all of these plants really do thrive in the heat, especially these Thailand giant Colocasias, which are finally starting to get some impressive size. I mean, look at that. This is a monster. All the beds near the house and the containers are doing really, really well. I'm super pleased. I'm happy to report that fertilizer that was making all the maggots has finally stopped. It doesn't stink anymore. I'm just gonna let it go. We have a couple of really impressive insects hanging out here on the front porch. There's a banana spider or a writing spider, orb spider. Totally doing its job, capturing all kinds of insects. And I've really been starting to harvest a lot of San Marzano tomatoes off of this one that's in this crescent container right here in the driveway. You see there's tons of fruit still to come. Here again is this Hydrangea paniculata. This is a variety called Green Cascade. And you see its benefit to pollinators is that it has both infertile, these flowers, but actual fertile flowers. And that's what those little puffs are. And that's what all the pollinators are going nuts over. And you can see I have two planted right here next to one another. One I've trained tree form. The other I coppice back as essentially like a ground perennial. So if you cut it back every year, it's gonna be much smaller. If you leave it, it's gonna, you know, be kind of like a, I think the perfect size shrub for, you know, property screening. But the real reason you're growing it is because of all the pollinator activity. I mean, there are countless bees and butterflies. That's a viceroy up there that looks like a monarch, but there were monarchs out here just a few minutes ago. So we are going to walk around and stalk butterflies today. It's my all-time favorite activity. Of course, here, sweet little honeybee. Everybody loves this Hydrangea paniculata Green Cascade. This whole area is looking great. I'm really pleased to see that a few tomatoes in the ground have not succumbed to death. They're just starting to poke out. I think this is Brad's Crazy Cherry. I have a few more over here, but you can see this one has definitely acquired some sort of disease. So, you know, they're just short-lived when they're planted in the ground here. But I really think the south border has come out great. We're finally harvesting squash and zucchini on a daily basis. And you know, I was super jealous of everybody's harvests in June and early July. I'm pretty pleased that I'm gonna have harvests through August, September, and October. Again, these borders have really started to fill in great. These Treasure Island sweet potatoes are just making all of my summer dreams come true. I just cannot say enough about how great they are, how low maintenance they are. I'm really excited about training this one up, but I'm most pleased with this variety that I think is just making the most incredible ground cover of all time. And what I love about this is, you know, I've always loved ornamental sweet potatoes, but they have a weird starch content, so you don't really eat those tubers. These have actually been bred to have delicious tubers to eat. And you can eat the foliage as well. It's not a huge, I don't do that all that much, I grow sweet potatoes for the tubers, but I've actually been using these in some meals just here and there, and they're quite tasty. So, you know, that's so great that they have this multiple purpose. And of course, the okra is really starting to come into its own. If you've never grown okra, it's worth it just for the flowers. It's so beautiful. You see how it's totally related to hibiscus. And of course that's the perfect size to harvest. It's really tender. You can actually eat it raw right off the plant, which I'm going to do because what the heck, right? It's so refreshing and crunchy. If you've never had okra, you are missing out. Okra is like one of my very favorite vegetables of all time. The feed tank bed has grown so much this week. And I didn't actually give this any additional fertilizer. It's just things are really starting to take off. You see the sunflowers are starting to get some size. The peanuts are definitely doing their job as a ground cover. Of course, the coleus, which were planted first, they've looked great ever since they were installed. And these peanuts were actually perennial. They came back from last year, and they are really filling in. 5 years with this feed tank, and I think this is my favorite planting. I'm really happy with how this has come out. I'm gonna get in there today and clean it, but also just float around and enjoy it. Now the squash in here are really performing great. Look at all these. So there is definitely an advantage to getting your squash in later, and that is so that you actually avoid the infestation of the squash borers. And this is a prime example. These actually got some squash borer damage early on, but they've grown out of it, and that's because they were planted so much later than most people do. You know, these didn't get planted until like the middle of June, and so now they're really productive and they look really pretty. And that, of course, is always my goal. I want people to see that vegetables have an ornamental quality. That's the point of a foodscape. And when you look at a bed like that, I hope that people would agree that those squash aren't just production. They're adding color and texture and a great level of value to the ornamentation of that landscape bed. I can't wait to show you how big these potted tomatoes have gotten that we did just a few weeks ago. I really do need to get my act together and start training these to some degree, because they have really filled in. I do water these every day with a hose. Now I'm not feeling like such a failure growing tomatoes. Of course, these aren't going to produce any tomatoes for next week's tomato tasting, but at least I will have tomatoes of my own at some point this season. And this bed, again, sweet potatoes mixed with the self-sown arugula. This bed is filled in so well. It's everything I was dreaming it would be. Just love when a plan comes together in the garden. We've been having to come out and harvest cucumbers every day. We have a whole method now for getting them off the top of the greenhouse. And we've been getting a lot of raspberries, and these are so delicious. And I have big plans today for getting more seeds sown. So I'll be making a video. I'm gonna do all my fall flowers and more fall vegetables so that I'll have plants available for sale during the fall open house on Saturday, October 9th. But I'm really pleased to show you how well everything's doing in the mist chamber. All of these hydrangeas and edgeworthia are they're all rooted, they're ready to be potted, and these will also be available during the fall open house. My adoration of carrots just keeps increasing exponentially. I love this carrot zinnia combo, which I of course did not do on purpose, it just happened. And I'm so happy to have a few carrots blooming now, because there were so many blooming in late spring, early summer. I love them. I love them like almost irrationally. Now, because we have monarchs, I'm really happy to have a lot of milkweed at the ready for their caterpillars to start eating. I planted quite a few varieties in this bed, and I of course have the Asclepias tuberosa planted in the feed tank bed. So we should have a very functional environment for the monarchs this season. The outside of the pumpkin patch is looking quite beautiful. The Seminole Pumpkin and the gourds, there's a combo here, are really starting to take a hold in this bed. You can see that Seminole Pumpkin's just growing out through the limelight hydrangea. It's going to grow into the witch hazel. I suspect it'll actually, by the end of the season, grow up into the peach and maybe even over to the prunus mume, judging by how it performed last year. This bed with the buckwheat, I just can't say enough about buckwheat. It is the solution to so many of gardeners' sort of temporary problems with open space or needing to, do something to enhance your soil, increase biodiversity, bring in more beneficial insects. Buckwheat does all of that, and it's such an inexpensive, high impact, very quick. This was sown on July 3rd, and here we are on August 1st. This border, I love that this phlox and veronica combo is so pretty. And I've got 3 grafted tomatoes that haven't died, so that's great. I'll show you what this border looks like from the outside view, as I'm always concerned. I don't want any of my neighbors to be offended, and I think this year it's definitely not offensive. I think it looks neat and interesting and organized and lush and beautiful. I know if I didn't live in this garden, I would enjoy this view, and that's what I hope to be able to offer my neighbors. This area, these zinnias, can't get enough of the butterflies at this time of year. These will be the pictures I look back on in January to remind myself of what is ahead, even if you're sweating through your clothes. Love the activity of the summer. Here is that zinnia Queen Lime Blush, my most popular photo on Instagram to date. But I really lucked out with this very first one that opened that was so completely full. As you see, a lot of the blooms are coming out more single. These are all from the same seed packet, but not all blooms are created equal. Now, I think they're all quite beautiful and interesting, but compare those to this one. That's the seed I want to collect. Every time I walk past this stand of phlox, there is at least one swallowtail. I could just stand here all day taking videos with butterflies. Is there really anything better? Well, if you can't tell, I am kind of melting to the point of needing to get inside and get some water. I am keeping my fingers crossed that we're actually going to get some rain today, but just to make sure that happens, I'm going to have to go turn on some sprinklers. And I hope that you have enjoyed today's garden tour with the many different pollinators that are here visiting us in the foodscape. I hope if you're able, you can come to the tomato tasting next Saturday. The link for tickets is in the description of this video. And if not, then I hope that you will plan to come out to visit for our fall open garden on Saturday, October 9th. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Happy August.